¿Qué tal? Muy buenas noches. Bienvenidos y bienvenidas a esta gran conversación que estamos a punto de tener con tres mujeres maravillosas desde mi perspectiva, poderosas, muy inteligentes y brillantes, que se encuentran en diferentes partes del mundo para entender un poco más qué significa esto, ¿no? Desarrollar tecnología para el bien, ya sea social, medioambiental, cívico. Entonces va a ser una charla muy interesante. Les recomiendo que tomen mucho las notas de estas grandes mujeres que me acompañan el día de hoy, porque vamos a tener muchísimos hallazgos, muchísimas referencias. Y bueno, justamente estamos a nada de empezar. Nada más me gustaría decirles que este panel va a ser en inglés, pues para respetar, ¿no? Que estamos en diferentes países, que nos acompañan personas de diferentes países. Y no me gustaría iniciar antes sin agradecerle mucho a Talent Land por esta invitación, Talent Republic y a IBM. Entonces, pues justo ahora vamos a cambiar a inglés, pero recuerden que esta transmisión se queda grabada para que ustedes después puedan revisarla y creo que tiene una función con subtítulos eventualmente. Entonces, eh, welcome Vanessa, Omri, and Deborah. We are just starting this very interesting discussion. I was just telling our audience how excited and happy I am to be joined by you guys from different parts of the world. I would like to introduce Deborah Alba, who is joining us here. She is the program coordinator at the Institute of Technology and Society of Rio. She's joining us from Brazil. Special thanks and special kudos to Omri Bora, the co-founder CEO at Tech for Good. She is based in Israel right now, and right now over there it's 4 a.m. in the morning. She kindly accepted this invitation, which I am grateful for. And last but not least, of course, is Vanessa Mason. She's the research director at the Institute for the Future. She's based in the United States. And well, I just wanted to welcome you to this conversation in which we want to inspire further and younger generations of these developers, innovators, students, scientifics, that are here gathering in this one of these largest events in Mexico and in Latin America. As I was telling you before, I had the chance to talk to all of these amazing women before this conversation in order to prepare for this panel. And it's very inspiring to share the same vision in different parts of the world, not just creating a better world through technology, looking to a better future from where we are. Sorry, I'm a bit nervous, as you can see. So I will also want to tell you a little bit of the objectives of this session is to understand a little bit about this Tech for Good framework and to also know what these leaders in different countries are doing, how they are pushing initiatives, programs, even public policy or social movements from within their countries. And also, well, as I tell you before, I want to inspire as many people as possible when when they are developing these new technologies and devices that are going to be helping us to solve the challenges that we are facing today, whether they are economic, environmental, social, even political. So thank you so much again. I will let you introduce yourselves a little bit in this next questions, but I wanted to give to the audience a little bit of descriptions, of your bio, for them to know who you are and who is joining me tonight. So Vanessa Mason, as I said before, is the research director at the Institute for the Future, a network of future smart organizations that support strategic foresight research into the urgent futures that will shape the next decade across the business, social, and civic spheres. Sorry, Vanessa, I'm gonna go to the next bio, but we can find all of our bios in the website of Developerland. Omri Borrell is the co-founder and CEO at Tech for Good, an organization that operates SDG-aligned incubators engaging international corporates and investors with Israel impact startups. Omri serves on the board of several organizations like the World Summit Awards, the MFO Impact, and To Be Friendly. She's, I guess, and I would like to say, one of the main references from this startup nation, as we know it in Israel. And last but not least, Deborah Alba holds a Master of Science in Gender Development and Globalization from London School of Economics and Political Sciences in the UK. She was awarded with a Chevening Scholarship, and she holds a BA in International Relationships from the Pontifical Catholic University in Rio de Janeiro. Um, she has completed courses and has a lot of experiences when it comes to gender equality, democracy, and civic tech. So now I'm gonna, because I usually talk a lot, I'm gonna let you do and run all this panel. Um, and of course, it's an open conversation. If you have further comments or if you want to add something, just please join to the conversation. But I would like to start with you, Omri, from Israel. If you could explain to us and to the audience what the tech for good concept and philosophy is. Actually, what's the philosophy and vision behind the tech for good framework? And if you could just add a little bit about what you're doing from Tech for Good in Israel and all of the ecosystem that you're developing, it will be great.
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me and thank you for inviting me to join this. It is very exciting to be sitting here and speaking to people halfway across the world. So I think Tech for Good, for me, it grew out of an opportunity that my partner and I identified. Being here at the Startup Nation, we see what technology can do, and I'm sure everyone heard of disruptive tech-based companies that came out of Israel and really changed industries across the world. And then when we were looking at this, we said, all of this talent, all of these resources, it's going into fintech and cyber and gaming, and that's great. What if we could harness all of that power and kind of shift it towards thinking about new creative ideas that can actually solve perhaps our global challenges, humanities challenges, social challenges, environmental challenges. And I think that the amazing thing is that when you do it through technology, suddenly you have something that is scalable, that can be not just a local solution that might work for one community or one region or one country. You can actually create a product or a service that can benefit millions and millions of people around the world. And the fact that it is tech-based allows you to do probably three things. One is to have a very, very wide delivery because it is tech. The second is that you can adapt it in a very data-driven way to the different needs, the different cultures, the different nuances of different communities around the world. And the third thing, that it becomes profitable because of the fact that once you create a product that is technology-based, you can actually spread it around and it will become much more profitable for you, the entrepreneur, for your investors, for your other stakeholders, and that creates an amazing opportunity. So what we've been doing here in the past 6 years in Israel is to simply show talented entrepreneurs the opportunity here to show them that this can mean a lot of money, that you can make huge profits, and at the same time actually make the world a better place. I don't know anyone who would not like to be part of that trend. And I'm really, really excited to see more and more people around the world that are kind of entering that mindset and no longer thinking about the fact that these things need to be separated. We don't need to do something for a living that is business oriented and then maybe volunteer in our free time. We can mix the two together and actually have a tech-based career, an entrepreneurial career that changes the world for better. And I think that's something that I'm very passionate about, and hopefully all of you guys out there as well.
Thank you, Omri. And this is amazing because as I was talking to you before, I think this is a very, I wouldn't say urgent, but a very accurate moment to start having these kind of conversations. I had the opportunity, as I said before, to talk to Vanessa the other day, and I was telling her and acknowledging all of the resources, courses, reports, indexes, and all of those, content that is available for us, and especially for free nowadays. But now one of the challenges for us is to actually have this kind of conversations and content in our language, and that is why, well, for me it was very important to have in this in the in this event, during this event, this kind of conversation, because it's not always and not only about developing technology for economic reasons, but as you mentioned before, to have that extra purpose to help with social causes and with social challenges that are affecting all of the society. Thank you, Omri. And now, Vanessa, I really love how you've been awarded so many times from different perspectives. No, you're one of the 40 under 40 tech diversity Silicon Valley. Um, you have been awarded also as one of the 200 Black women in tech to follow on Twitter, and profiles like you are really inspiring because besides that, besides all of those awards and recognition, you're pushing different perspectives and different social matters through your social network, through your research that I've been consulting, and even through your projects, the future of belonging that I'm now registered to. And I would like the audience to get to know you a little bit better. And if you could please tell me a little bit more of what your experience has been, what you do in the Institute for the Future, and also from your experience, what has been your experiences when fostering social good through technology?
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for having me here. It's wonderful to at least meet some of you through a screen, as we are all meeting everyone these days through screens. So, to tell you a little bit about Institute for the Future, we're a 52-year-old nonprofit based in Northern California here in the United States. And we got started shortly after one of our co-founders actually was working on packet switching for the US government. And packet switching is, of course, the foundational technology that was the beginnings of the internet. And basically, it was him and two other men who started Institute for the Future, really with this premise that one, that obviously the internet was going to be a big technological shift. So this was 52 years ago, so we didn't quite know what was coming yet, but certainly that's a lot of our work, is thinking about what's coming next. And then secondly, this premise that I really want to underline too, which I think is really important to think about tech for good, is that um, a lot of times when people think about the future and imagine the future, technology is at the center of what defines the future. And at IFTF, all of our work is really focused on the fact that technology both is shaped by humans and is also shaped by humans, and like the technology shapes us as well. And so, really, what our work is focused on is, yes, looking at what are those new disruptions that are coming that might be technological in nature, but ultimately trying to make sense of what is the impact on humans, what is the impact on organizations, what's the impact on communities, what's the impact on governments, and really in thinking about that, what is the longer term view of that? So the time horizon that we usually use for our research is 10 years. It's just far enough out that we're not just going to be thinking about what's the sort of next, what's going to come next in the sprint that we might be working on in that product. But really also close enough that personally we can think about how our lives were different 10 years ago, or how they might have been different 15 years ago as well. And so in our work at IFTF, we're a research organization, but we also really try to tell people we're also a civic futures organization as well. So in addition to all the research that we're doing in crafting these stories from the future, so basically looking at what are some interesting, weird, bizarre, provocative innovations from today, and what if we were to think about 10 years in the future, if those things were to intersect, if they were to collide, what could the world look like, and what can emerge from that in terms of technological shifts, social shifts, political, economic shifts, and in imagining that, helping people be able to imagine what the future could look like so that they can make decisions today. So that's really underlies all of our research, what we call our foresight, insight, action cycle. So taking those stories or the foresight that we're developing, catalyzing or causing an insight, so helping you see the world in a different way, which can get you to making a different decision in the present based on what you can imagine and create and think about in the future. The other thing that I said about Civic Futures Organization is that we're really focused on training. So one resource that I want to offer to all of you, we have a futures thinking specialization on Coursera. It consists of 5 courses that are all spearheaded by our gaming and research director, Jane McGonigal. She's a fantastic teacher. She teaches at Stanford. And so that's an opportunity for you to get futures training, which is just a really helpful skill. If you're kind of overwhelmed by looking at all the different problems that are out there in the world, it's a nice opportunity to think about what's possible in terms of technology and help place that in context, and think about what other forces or changes are happening on the horizon that might affect how technology plays out, so you can see where there might be opportunities to have a positive impact through technology. Or if you're already working on something, to think about what are maybe some potential consequences or risks as based on what you're developing, and think about how you can change what you're developing now so that you can build towards a better world, even today, before that actually occurs. So I'll stop there. And again, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Vanessa. And what you are just saying right now is really interesting, because this is the kind of perspective that we want to push in our young generations, especially in events like this. And now that we have access, as I was telling before, to other courses and contents, uh, we are creating a community here, which is the future exploration, and we're trying to gather all of this knowledge, as you were saying, methodologies, even other references, in order for us to start communicating this kind of frameworks to the society. And you mentioned something really interesting about being worried about what's happening, but also as one of the lead institutions that we have here, Ashoka, which is in more than 90 countries. This concept of being an agent of change, not only being worried about what's going on, but taking action, and to foster solutions, especially if they are technology based solutions. But so, well, thank you so much for sharing all of that information. I will make sure to share it also to the audience, and also to introduce you, Deborah. I am also very amazed by your work. I was talking to you on, I guess, on Monday, and we were discussing about how your research focuses on fields like democracy, technology, even gender studies. So, based on that, if you could just please tell me how do you think technology can help us achieve the SDGs, the Social Development Goals established by the UN, and of course talk a little bit more about you and the Institute for Technology and Society in Rio.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Developerland, for the invitation. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Great. So thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure being here and being here with amazing other panelists as well. I'm really glad to meet you again, although only through this screen here is just basically me talking to my own self on the screen. But I'm sure you on the other side can listen and maybe try to interact with us. And I think I'm just maybe going to try to introduce something by pulling from the previous talks from Omri and from Vanessa. One of the things that Vanessa was talking about is that literally technology shapes us while we shape it. And I really like a kind of like a motto that I've been listening around and around that says that technology is nor positive nor negative, nor is it neutral, right? Because when we do decide to use technology for whatever purpose that we are trying to incorporate technology for, it means that we are incorporating it for a reason and for a determinate objective or goal. And in that sense, whatever we do on the one hand as developers, or what we do on the other side as users, is definitely going to be shaped by this technology. And at the same time, we are going to interfere in the way this technology is developed and is shaped. And when talking about a little bit about the Institute for Technology and Society, we are a civil society organization, a nonprofit organization based in Brazil. But our kind of look is very global. We are part of a network of more than 80 centers working on internet and technology and society all over the world, with centers from Brazil and the United States and Harvard University, from India, from Israel as well. And the network of centers kind of gives us the possibility to bring what is really crucial for the Institute, which is a perspective from the global South towards the opportunities and challenges brought by technology. It's important that when we think about incorporating technology, to talk about the SDGs, to talk about democracy, to talk about the public good or the common good in this broader sense, that we think about the challenges that this brings us. And in different contexts, for example, us here in Brazil and probably in Mexico, many of the challenges that we face might be very similar when we're talking about access, for example. So it's impossible that we think about using technological solutions if we're not going to bridge in the gap that vulnerable groups, that, for example, women, for example, people of color don't have access or have less access to the internet, have less access to technology. And this is, again, talking only about the user side of it. When we talk about the producer or the designer or even the developer side of it, we know that, for example, in the Silicon Valley, and I'm sure Vanessa can talk even more about this than me, but we have only 4 or 5% of women, Black women, leading organizations, startups in that front. So how can we really talk about inclusion, right, and the use of technology for democratic purposes, or even for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, when people cannot have access to technology? So I think this is a very important challenge for us to tackle and to have in mind, especially considering, different context and the context of developing countries and even within developing countries. Here in Brazil, more than 70% of the population has access to internet. But how do people access the internet is a different story. When we look, for example, at the lower income classes, they are the ones who can only access the internet through their mobile phones. So are we thinking about technological-based solutions that incorporate a mobile-first approach? Are we taking that into consideration when we are thinking about using technology to achieve the SDGs? So just to maybe close this initial speech, this initial talk and contributing to the conversation, on the other side, there is a lot of opportunity. And in that sense, I go back a little bit to Omri's talk and to what she said about scale and context. Technology allows us to, for example, be here together today from 4 different countries in the world in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of one of the biggest sanitary crises that we have lived through. So there is a lot of opportunity. And considering many of the SDGs, we can use mobile-based or we can use technological-based solutions to achieve the SDGs. Considering, for example, SDG number 5 related to gender equality, when we are talking about the use of mobile apps for domestic violence, when we're using chatbots to improve the access of women and girls to education, when we're talking about even platforms to denounce domestic abuse or even other kinds of harassment, all of that is super important. So technology does offer a lot of opportunities, but it does not come without the challenges as well.
Thank you, Deborah. This is really interesting conversation, and I guess we could even have another panel based on what you just said and what you just mentioned. And yesterday, I was participating in a panel by the World Resources Institute, and they were showing and presenting all of the projects they have regarding artificial intelligence for global warming and climate change. And one of the conclusions they mentioned at the end of the 10% of the things that I understood, because there are a lot of technical, information. But one of the conclusions that they mentioned at the end, it was to actually, and it was for the scientific data science and engineers and all of these tech developers, to not stay in that bubble of the technology developer, to actually come to the society and explain and present the projects or the implementations being made and get the feedback from them. Because if we don't talk to your beneficiaries, you'll never close the gap, in this kind of developments. Also, you mentioned something really really important, which is the civil society involved in all of these kind of developments, coming from technology, coming from government, sorry, or from corporates, and even a lot of different groups working together. Here in Mexico, we have an amazing example of an agency. It's called C Minds. It's a think tank, an action tank based in San Francisco and in Mexico, and of course here in Guadalajara. And they are developing the artificial intelligence agenda for Mexico, and they are doing it not only with scientifics and technology developers and experts, and math experts, but also with a lot of other experts from different areas, governments, universities, society, and they are doing this amazing job directing everything through a perspective of ethics, being responsible, and being more justice. When developing one of these very interesting topics, which is the artificial intelligence. Omri, I owe you for when you come to Mexico. But as I was saying before, I can see how you and Tech for Good are, your organization are a main reference in your ecosystem. And to ask you about this specific, concept of ecosystem. How and why are important the collaborations and synergies between different sectors, to foster the use of technology for social good? How can you engage more universities and governments, civil societies, incubators or accelerators, and even in your case, amazing work that you're doing with impact investors? So, how important are those synergies?
Thank you. I think that what you said is true for any tech developer. You can't just stay in your own house if there's not a pandemic outside, and you have to go out and meet your different stakeholders. When you're looking to do social change, then this becomes even more important. But more than that, I think that the tech for good mindset, and it's different than just developing a mainstream business startup. As was mentioned here before me, I think you're starting to understand the different dilemmas or different thoughts that tech for good developers might have as to how they're using the technology, how they can avoid bias, how they can use it to change existing institutions and division of power within our society, then I think it's almost a must for developers and for entrepreneurs to think about the different stakeholders and different sector organizations that they need to approach and to make part of their network. So when we're looking at taking food waste, for example, as a challenge, now becoming a huge issue due to COVID-19 implications, which unfortunately set us back as humanity in our fight for ending world hunger. We see more and more people who are living on daily salaries just being brought back down under the poverty line and suffering from food insecurity. And if we're able to take a small chunk out of the food that is wasted or lost within the process of growing it and all the way up to the consumer's plate, that can be a huge benefit to help people who are now suffering from food insecurity. So this is just as an example. An entrepreneur thinking about a startup that will prevent food waste or food loss almost has to seek and engage different nonprofits that are working on food distribution or are working with those communities that are suffering from food insecurity to understand their needs, to understand how to reach them, to understand better where the gap and what is not working properly today. But those entrepreneurs should also talk to government institutions and understand the public sector's concept and idea about this, what existing programs are being done, how they can sync themselves and interact with existing platforms and not try to do everything by themselves. And of course, they would also want to speak to academics and researchers who have done many years of aggregating knowledge about this and maybe thinking about behavioral economics as a tool to change people's habits and how they interact with their food. And who am I missing? Corporates, if we're looking at different business organizations that are involved within the food chain, they have an actual incentive to join what you're doing and to help you do it, because for them, it means not only to do good, but it could actually mean improving their business and creating further revenue. And that's in itself an incredible incentive that you can use for your benefit. And last but not least, your investors. So David mentioned impact investors. Impact investors is a very, very general term for investors that when they're looking at potential companies to invest in, they're not only measuring their potential to be financially profitable, but they're also looking and trying to measure what kind of social or environmental impact they're going to do and how valuable or beneficial this investment can be on that bottom line as well. So we usually talk about a double bottom line. We're looking at the financial bottom line as well as the social or environmental bottom line. And I think for an entrepreneur looking to act within the tech for good space, it's crucial to understand the incentives and the mindset of all of these different stakeholders. And when we as Tech for Good, which is a platform organization, and our mission is to support entrepreneurs on their journey, we're looking to communicate with each of these different stakeholders and to help them sometimes see and identify their needs or their benefit from becoming part and interacting with such a startup. And I think that today it is becoming more and more clear as to why this is not a nice to have thing, but it is a must. We can't continue to do business as usual and expect things to change and maybe, have some PR about responsibility and ethical consumerism. We have to change how we're actually doing things. And I'm really happy to say that I think For many people in the business sector, in the public sector, in the nonprofit sector, this is becoming something that they're not only realizing, but they're embracing, and they're happy to be part of this trend. And so I think when you're a tech for good entrepreneur, you actually have an advantage. You have this incredible story, incredible passion and intentionality to do something that speaks to so many other people. And you can use that to harness so many other organizations and people to be part of what you're doing and help you on your journey. That's it.
Thank you, Omri. This is amazing, and it's really important for us to always acknowledge and to start from the needs, and the challenges that some of the vulnerable groups are having, or some companies, of course, are having, in order to develop solutions, tech solutions. But for example, one of the most inspiring cases for me, it will be the human centered artificial intelligence institution that Stanford has already. They are developing artificial intelligence based on humans and human needs and human challenges. So thank you for that intervention. Vanessa, now I would like to ask you, you mentioned before about the risks, and this is, something really, something that we have to put out there in this kind of conversations, because of course there are risks when developing technologies. So if you could please tell us what kind of risks can be found when designing and developing technologies for social good, and how can we anticipate the consequences of what's being developed now?
Great, thank you. So, while we, a lot of what we tell people, of course, like we're a futures research organization, and one of the first things that people think is that our job is to predict the future, but we try to tell people our job isn't to predict, but it's really to look at ways of understanding what are possible futures. So one tool that we've developed to help people think about what are possible futures that are oriented around technology is our Ethical OS Toolkit. And in our Ethical OS Toolkit, basically we outline 8 different risk zones for technology. And so this is a toolkit that's meant to be used by people who are developing technology today, but really to have a framework and a practice to be able to think about what you're developing, and in a structured way to be able to think about what are possible consequences of what you're developing, whether it's used the way that you intend to, and maybe it's an unintended consequence, or it's something that maybe a bad actor is using in ways that you aren't thinking about because you're not aware of who this bad actor is, or maybe a consequence that might come later downstream that you just may not be thinking about because you're focused on short-term needs and short-term gains, and aren't thinking about what would happen if this were to scale or otherwise expand or extend. So there's 8 different risk zones. I don't want to read off all of them, but some of them that some of you might be aware of. I'm sure you've seen there's been a lot of issues around disinformation, propaganda, so obviously technology being used to misinform and mislead people. When thinking about it, like my industry background's in health and in healthcare, so there's also a lot of growing research around how addictive is technology, whether it's looking at games, whether it's looking at like social media, and like what effect does that have on our mood. Questions around, of course, being surveilled, which I think is going to be even more prominent now as we're trying, like all of our countries are trying to find ways out of this pandemic. And so now contact tracing is a common term that is now being thrown about. And so, what are we willing to trade off in terms of privacy versus safety with something like that, in terms of being surveilled around who we've come in contact with, who we've put at risk. So there's, as I said, there's 8 different risk zones in this toolkit. It's available for free. It's at ethicalOS.org. And so you can download that. And definitely that's a resource that you can use in your teams, with other communities that you might be working in and looking at solving problems with. And it's a great way of just at least trying to initially cover your bases and trying to think about what are some of those longer term or even maybe short term consequences that you may not be aware of because of who you have on your team. And just I want to close at this last point because I think that Deborah brought this up, that when you look at Silicon Valley and obviously the composition of who's part of these companies and leading these companies and building this technology, they're not the most diverse crowd. And so when using tools like this, especially around futures, like a lot of times we talk about how, the future is a safe space, but it's also one that requires collaboration. You need to have people who have different perspectives than you, who may have different priorities than you, all trying to come together to think and imagine and sort of work through what are either challenges or risks that you might be trying to think about, or where maybe opportunities that you're not seeing because those aren't challenges that you've encountered before, or you've encountered them in a different way. And so you may be blind to solutions that are sitting in front of you. So in using tools like this, we really encourage you to think broadly about who you're working with and who you're bringing in to think about risks. Because I think even, I don't know how many of you saw this recently, Twitter actually just released, or is slowly releasing audio tweets. So you now have the ability to record your voice. And I've already seen a lot of criticism, especially around accessibility, because there's no closed captioning on these audio tweets. So people who are hard of hearing or deaf can't use these tweets. And in the United States, that's definitely cause for a lawsuit. And apparently companies have been sued for this before. It's one of those things that if Twitter had someone on their team, they might have caught that before making it public. Thanks.
Thank you, Vanessa. And before giving the mic to Deborah, just to continue this amazing idea that Vanessa just mentioned, I would also like to ask you, why should technology, and it's really related to this, it's one of the topics that I'm more interested about, is why should technology be based and designed and even deployed based on ethics, social inclusion, democracy, and human rights? And I don't know, are we reinforcing topics like gender gap, racism? Yesterday in this panel that I was telling you about from the World Resources Institute, one of the other recommendations they shared was also to see and to observe who is collecting the data, who is developing the algorithms when it comes to artificial intelligence. So it's something that I would like to get to know your perspective, Vanessa, Deborah, sorry, on how are these technologies, very how we should focus on democracy and justice and human rights.
Thank you, David. I think, this is very, very close to my heart and very close to my work. And maybe there are 2 points here. And again, I'm going to try to connect to the previous interventions of both Vanessa and Omri, because I think they do really flow together. And I think you were asking, Omri, about the idea of ecosystems, right? And when we are talking about technology, we definitely have different actors that are responsible and have different roles in the development of technology, be them, developers themselves, be them business people, be them academia or the media. Now, specifically, even talking about, the informational ecosystem and the complexity of the informational ecosystem that we have government. So I think it's important to understand that by having all of these different actors in this ecosystem, we're not only complexifying the possibilities, but we're also complexifying the solutions, right? So it's a two-sided thing again, where we have many different actors, shaping different problems and bringing in their different visions of these problems related to technology, as well as these solutions. And in that sense, when we really want to build something that is long-lasting, again, not only talking about technology, but whatever it is, we go to consensus. And having a multi-sectoral or multilateral approach to the development of technology means that you can have stronger consensuses built that will not only, have whatever project that it is that we are thinking and shaping by this diverse group of people be longer lasting, but it will also be more used and again, more spread out. So thinking about, for example, a technology, or thinking about, for example, the regulation of technology. When we think about the regulation of technology, we cannot, exclude any of these groups, because all of them, are fundamental to the development of this technology, because they have interests in the creation of such regulation, and at the same time, there is the possibility of making these consensuses stronger. So I think this element of ecosystems is really important here when we're talking about the importance for governments to use technology based on these principles. And I think a second element is exactly related to the risks, and some of them Vanessa has mapped out, and all of them are really related to again, the public interest. So take disinformation, for example. The problem that we are having now, and specifically during the pandemics, just to maybe try to build some kind of specific point, because disinformation is a very, very big issue in itself. But when we're talking about disinformation during the pandemics, look at the catastrophic effects that this can have. We've seen, well, again, I can bring in Brazil as an example. We're having a major political crisis being enhanced because of the pandemics, which is causing disinformation and disinformation networks to be even greater than before. And disinformation is causing people to take horrible actions towards their health and towards public health as a whole. So the risks, they're really related to why governments should take these principles into consideration. So, for example, again, talking about pandemics and thinking about applications that use contact tracing, you cannot design an application like that if you don't have privacy by design, if you don't have ethics by design. This is a must, especially when we're talking about technology being developed by governments. Just a quick anecdotal example of something that happened in Brazil. During the pandemics, there was a new kind of financial aid that was disbursed for the population, for the lower income classes, and they were able to access this financial aid through an application, a mobile application. And there were more than 30 fake apps created just to steal people's personal data and to, use for unpurposeful meanings, just because of this situation. So if we don't have all these principles embedded in technology when it is being designed by the government, it means that the product that is being developed, again, be it a technology specifically, or be it a regulation of that technology, or everything else, or even public policy, it means that that product won't be longer lasting because it won't be based on very strong consensuses.
Thank you so much, Deborah. And again, you touched another very interesting point. Omri, I would like to connect what Deborah just mentioned, and also we're gonna be closing up this amazing panel with this last intervention, with these last interventions. Sorry, Omri, you in your vast experience have worked for ministries, for the governments. You've been also a very important part of the civil society, and you talk every day to startups, that are developing impactful technologies. So, in connecting what Deborah just said, I would like to know your perspective on and how important is for the governments to use technology for transparency, accountability, even impact measurement. And how technology and public policy promote social welfare.
Wow, that is a huge question, and of course, something that needs to be discussed later. I would just want to say, I think I loved both Vanessa's comments, and just to relate to that, I think that governments, as opposed to different, sorry, my cat is in the way, but I think that governments, just like any other organization, just like Twitter, they have to also think about not just diversity issues, but in a broader sense, to look at the needs of different communities, and just to be able to kind of synchronize all of these different aspects. That is a huge, huge challenge. And I think what we're seeing from different governments around the world, not everywhere, of course, but from different governments, we're seeing kind of this shift towards letting the private sector or the social sector take on roles that were traditionally held by the government in the last 100 years. And I think that once this is being done, an interesting tool that is being used more and more is the concept of payment by results. And I think that is a blessed trend where governments are selecting the organizations that they will work with, and the way that they will be measuring the success of these different programs and actually budgeting them as well, is through measuring their success. And when we're starting to think about how we're measuring success and what success actually is, when we're looking at different social or environmental or peace-related conflicts, this creates a discussion that is very deep and is a must, and actually I think encourage the government to include more and more stakeholders in that discussion, to first of all understand how a success would look like and how we could measure it. And measurement leads to a different kind of management of the project in itself. So payment by results, which enables governments to very clearly frame what they're aiming to achieve, but not necessarily how it can be done, is also a platform that encourages a lot of creativity by other organizations with coming up with different sorts of action plans and different concepts of how different platforms can be used by the government to address public needs. And I think that creates a very, very different and positive process in simply doing things in a different way, because I think we can all look back and see that what has been done so far has maybe progressed us, helped us progress a lot, but still has a lot of holes when it comes to thinking about underprivileged communities, in thinking about bias that we might have because of who is sitting on the chair and making those decisions, and also in kind of, I think, changing our maybe kind of set thought about, sorry, I'm kind of losing my words, but what I'm trying to say is that I think sometimes we have a very fixed mind about what can be done, how it can be done. Simply thinking, taking 5 years back, many people would have said, technology for good, this is something that can be done by a nonprofit, but it definitely can't be something that is a full-blown company that makes money out of actually doing good. And I think today we've already seen proof that this is not true. So the way for governments to encourage new ways of thinking about how to deal with social and environmental challenges, I think that is a great tool to be used to promote the public interest.
Yes, and public policy is based on evidence, and as you were saying, results. What an interesting point of view, Omri. So we are at the end of our panel, but before we go, I would just like to give you like a few, like I don't know, less than a minute probably, if you could just close your interventions, probably say some inspiring words, and probably point us or direct us to your websites or other references in order to keep these conversations from happening. So that will be amazing. And again, thank you all for joining me tonight. And we can start with you, Vanessa, if you could just say your final thoughts about it and give us some, I don't know, feedback or inspiring words.
Sure. I guess the inspiring words is just to see yourself as an agent of change and building a better future. So I think I listed a number of different resources. So Ethical OS, our Coursera course. If you're really interested in questions around truth and disinformation and misinformation, we actually have a map that we just released that's titled Cognitive Immunity. So it's thinking about what are positive ways that we can reinforce people being able to understand and sift through all the crazy things that we all see on the internet. So that's another, if you're in particular looking at that issue. But I'd say first and foremost, see yourself as an agent of change. And again, we have a lot of resources, and that's our marker of success is, are people provoked enough sufficiently? Have we done our job good enough of describing a story from the future so that people take action, so that they take action today and they don't wait for bad things to happen, but see themselves as an agent of change and act accordingly.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. Deborah?
Maybe in a tweet, I go back to sort of my initial message. Technology is not neutral, nor positive, nor negative without human action. So whatever we are thinking about developing or using technology, we must think ourselves as actors that can affect technology and again be affected by it, and thinking about it from a not neutral perspective, and not put technology in this very technical point, in this very technical side in which we are not included and able to shape it as we want it. And just to give you a few resources here and there, the Institute for Technology and Society's website is also in English, but in Portuguese as well. Unfortunately, not in Spanish so far, but maybe soon. We are probably going to do that. One thing that you can access is a report that is both in English and Spanish that we released with Digital Future Society, a think tank based in Spain, on disinformation and citizen empowerment. You can also look at that. And another tool that we are developing within the Institute for Technology and Society is called Atrapabot. For the ones attending here in Spanish, or for the English speakers here, it would be the bot catcher. And the idea is that you kind of understand a little bit more about automated propaganda or computational propaganda and disinformation online. So you can access it on Pegabot or even Atrapabot. So if you can use it and test it and give us your feedback on the website. And also ITS has many courses, but the big majority of them will be in Portuguese, unfortunately. But if you want, you can also check on our website as well. And again, thank you for this amazing conversation.
Thank you, Deborah. And last but not least, Amri, please.
Thank you again for having me here. To be very, very practical, we are incredibly enthusiastic about working with companies that inspire us from Latin America. We do have an initiative around food waste in Mexico, and we'd love to hear from entrepreneurs that are addressing that issue. We're also working on different SDG related issues, so you're welcome to search for us online and just reach out if you have an amazing technology that you want to do good with, and we'd be happy to help and support you in any way that we can, and go out and change the world. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Amri. Y bueno, para terminar, les agradezco muchísimo a todos los asistentes que nos acompañaron esta noche para esta charla tan interesante. De nuevo, muchísimas gracias a Talentland, a IBM por esta grandiosa oportunidad para compartir este tipo de contenidos. Y ya saben, ahora está de su lado ser agentes de cambio cuando estén desarrollando tecnología para el futuro. Muchas gracias.